My name is Livingston-Coleman, and today this is my audience. Today, as humans, we use two tools that are vital in our lives that we use on an everyday basis. Both of these tools actually happen to start with the letter T, if anyone can guess what these two tools are. Okay. Well, these two tools are technology and transportation. But in order for us to use these two tools in our life, they have to work properly, they have to be wired correctly, and they have to have a certain good balance of materials in order for them to function correctly. And very similar to technology is our brain. Our brain functions very similar to technology. If there's something in our brain that's not working correctly, if there's not a good balance of certain type of chemicals that we use in our brain to make it function correctly, we receive interruption or receive malfunctions. So just very similarly to technology, for example, like a car or a computer. Actually, for example, a computer, if it's not wired correctly, we cannot receive a connection or receive interruptions in our connection. Or for a car, like I was saying earlier, if there's not enough oil, then the car floods, or the engine floods, or if there's not enough coolant, then the car overheats. So it has to be a good balance of both in order for us to function correctly. We all have brains, but some of us, our brains do not function correctly all the time, or receive interruptions or malfunctions, or whatever the case may be. In this type of condition that I'm speaking about that makes certain people's brains malfunction, it's called epilepsy. Epilepsy is more commonly known as seizures. Most people know what seizures are. They have a lot of stigma or whatever stereotypes that they associate with seizures. But today, in order to educate myself further, I've had personal experiences with epilepsy. But to further educate myself, I've interviewed my mother, who I've lived with for the longevity of my life, and she has had seizures for the duration of my life. So I've had first-hand experiences with that, and then also I've done my own further research with also having these first-hand experiences and interviewing my mother. I've done further research to ensure a valid presentation today for us about epilepsy and about seizures. So the first thing that I'll be doing to you, and I'll be giving you a basic terminology, some things that will be presented today in regards to epilepsy and seizures, and then secondly, I'll be giving you some causes of seizures, and then finally, I'll be walking you through the basic process of what happens neurologically in the brain while a seizure is occurring. So now that you know exactly what I'm going to be presenting today, I'll be going into the terminology to help you understand further. Okay, some of the terms. The first term I'll be giving to you, if you don't know what epilepsy is, epilepsy is a condition, or it's a neurological condition or neurological disease, disorder in the brain. Or epilepsy is a neurological disease that affects the brain. And neurological is anything that has to do with the nervous system, and the brain the brain is a part of the nervous system. So then, therefore, when a seizure occurs, it affects the brain. The seizure is defined as abnormal function or abnormal activity within the brain that allows it to malfunction. And certain parts of the brain, or different parts of the brain, are affected when a seizure occurs. And the basic two major parts of the brain that are affected when a seizure occurs that you will need to know is the temporal lobe. And the temporal lobe affects, or it is the part of the brain that actually controls your memory and your emotions. And then the second part is the occipital lobe, and the occipital lobe in your brain controls vision. So now that you know some of these basic terms that I'm going to be using during this presentation, we can now proceed into some of the causes or things that cause epilepsy and seizures. Okay, so one of the first causes of epilepsy is genetics. Someone may have epilepsy running through their family, and they can be predisposed to having a seizure or developing epilepsy if it runs through their family. Something can happen that can trigger epilepsy if someone is predisposed to this type of condition. One of those causes could be head injury, a blow to the head, or a major blow to the head during a car accident. Anything can happen if a person is predisposed to epilepsy, then they can develop a seizure, or they can just have a seizure, regardless due to the head trauma, or something like a stroke. Stroke, which causes head injury, a person can develop or start to have a seizure due to the injury down to the brain by the stroke. Another cause could be trauma. Trauma, if someone experiences a traumatic experience or something traumatizing that happens during their life, they go into shock, they could easily have a seizure due to that. And then another cause could be high levels of a substance. The easy one, drugs. If a person overdoses on drugs, they overdose on the drugs, and the stimulation in the brain, too much stimulation in the brain, a lot of activity going on can cause them to have a seizure. Or vice versa, someone who does not have, or someone who's trying to wean off of drugs, someone who's going through rehabilitation or something, when they withdraw from the drugs, there's not as much stimulation or things going on inside of their head, and then there's too less activity that they're not accustomed to, and then they could lead to a seizure. Or very heavy drinking, a person who's an alcoholic who drinks very, very heavily, stimulating the brain as well, can also lead to some type of seizure or epilepsy. Or just high levels of sodium, a person who has very, very high blood pressure or very high levels of blood sugar, like a diabetic or something like that, someone can develop a seizure with that. So now that you know some of the causes of seizures, and you know some of the basic terminology, and you know some of the causes, we can now go further and we can dig into what happens neurologically inside of the brain while a seizure is occurring. So first thing is that our brain in humans functions through electrical activity through nerves and chemicals, and there's chemicals in these nerves that create a balance in our brain that allows our brain to function and allows our body to do certain things. So there should be a good balance within those chemicals in the brain. If there's not a good balance in the brain, then that creates an imbalance. So it's a chemical imbalance. So then the nerves are not striking correctly, or there's not a balance of electrical activity that surges through our brain. So when a seizure occurs, there's a sudden surge of too much electrical activity that happens within the brain that allows someone to malfunction, or the brain to malfunction or have an interruption, allows someone to actually have a seizure. Or there's not enough electrical activity, or there's not a good balance of the chemicals, just too low, so that can also allow someone to have a seizure. So there just must be a good balance of the electrical and the chemical activity within the brain. But there are different types of seizures. So depending on the type of seizure, different things happen neurologically. So when a seizure occurs, there is a sudden surge of electrical activity, like I mentioned before. But there are two different types of the first type of seizure is a partial seizure or a focal seizure. A lot of people don't know about these type of seizures. They don't really associate these type of seizures, or when they think of a seizure, they don't think about this type of thing. But it could happen, like I was speaking about before, in the temporal lobe, where it could just affect that part of the brain, or it could affect the occipital lobe part of the brain, where a person may experience dizziness, they may experience flashing lights or deja vu, or they could just go blank for a period of seconds, and then they could forget what happened just prior to them having a seizure, and then they snap back into reality, or they come back to their full senses after their brain has had a minor malfunction. But with a generalized seizure, which is the seizure that most people think about, the stereotypical, with a person falling out and foaming at the mouth, certain things like that. Generalized seizures actually when both parts of the brain, the temporal lobe and the occipital lobe, both have a malfunction, or there's a certain electrical surge, or whatever the case may be happening in the brain, but both of the parts of the brain are affected at the same time, and this allows a person to actually fall out, and their body starts to stiffen, and then they can have physical convulsions and certain different things like that, and the body tenses up, and then this can go, depending on the severity of the seizure, it can go on for a matter of seconds, or it can go on for a matter of minutes. But after the seizure is actually finished, the person's body finally relaxes, but they regain consciousness, and after they regain the consciousness, their body actually starts to go back and the brain reboots, and then they start to function normally how they usually would function. But it might take some time for them to actually fully reboot after they might not know where they are for a while, certain things like that. But you have to work with them, and then they finally regain consciousness and they come back into their normal state of being. So today I've walked you through the basic terms of things that are associated with epilepsy and seizures, and then I've given you the causes of certain things that trigger epilepsy, and then also I'll walk you through the neurological process of what happens in the brain during an epileptic seizure. So thank you for your time.